Can you identify the largest and smallest things in the world? Try to get at least 35 out of 50 correct. Let's put your knowledge to the ultimate test. Let's begin.
Which is the largest ocean in the world? Right answer. Pacific Ocean. Which is the smallest ocean in the world? Right answer. Arctic Ocean. Which is the largest continent by land area? Right answer. Asia. Which is the smallest continent by land area? Right answer. Australia. Which is the largest country in the world by area? Right answer. Russia. Which is the smallest country in the world? Right answer. Vatican City. Which is the largest planet in our solar system? Right answer. Jupiter. Which is the smallest planet in our solar system? Right answer. Mercury. Which is the largest animal on Earth? Right answer. Blue whale. Which is the smallest mammal in the world by body mass? Right answer. Bumblebee bat. Which is the largest land animal? Right answer. African elephant. Which is the smallest bird in the world? Right answer. The hummingbird. Which is the largest living bird? Right answer. Ostrich. Which is the smallest species of snake? Right answer. Barbados thread snake. Which is the largest living reptile? Right answer. Saltwater crocodile. Which is the largest shark species? Right answer. Whale shark. Which is the smallest known shark species? Right answer. Dwarf lantern shark. Which is the largest species of bear? Right answer. Polar bear. Which is the smallest bear species? Right answer. Sun bear. Which is the largest living cat species? Right answer. Tiger. Which is the smallest wild cat species? Right answer. Rusty spotted cat. Which is the largest desert in the world? Right answer. Antarctic desert. Which is the largest hot desert in the world? Right answer. Sahara Desert. Which is the largest island in the world? Right answer. Greenland. Which is the largest lake by surface area? Right answer. Caspian Sea. Which is the deepest lake in the world? Right answer. Lake Baikal. Which is the largest freshwater lake by surface area? Right answer. Lake Superior. Which is the smallest bone in the human body? Right answer. Stapes. Which is the largest bone in the human body? Right answer. Femur. Which is the largest organ of the human body? Right answer. Skin. Which is the smallest muscle in the human body? Right answer. Stapedius. Which is the largest muscle in the human body? Right answer. Gluteus maximus. Which is the largest artery in the human body? Right answer. Aorta. What are the smallest blood vessels in the human body called? Right answer. Capillaries. Which is the largest internal organ in the human body? Right answer. Liver. Which is the largest flower in the world? Right answer. Rafflesia arnoldii. Which is considered the smallest flowering plant? Right answer. Wolffia. Which is the largest tree species by volume? Right answer. Giant sequoia. Which tree species can grow to the greatest height? Right answer. Coast redwood. Which is the largest species of penguin? Right answer. Emperor penguin. Which is the smallest penguin species? Right answer. Little penguin. Which is the largest species of deer? Right answer. Moose. Which is the smallest species of deer? Right answer. Pudu. Which is the largest species of owl? Right answer. Eurasian eagle owl. Which is the smallest owl species? Right answer. Elf owl. Which is the largest species of crocodilian? Right answer. Saltwater crocodile. Which is the smallest crocodilian species? Right answer. Dwarf caiman. Which is the largest species of whale? Right answer. Blue whale. Which is the smallest cetacean in the world? Right answer. Vaquita. Which is the largest living primate? Right answer. Gorilla.